Mountain Boy here. Today I thought I'd just go over how I built my Moldering Privy because it is kind of a DIY guide. It's mostly a mixture of me kind of talking through the process and also working in some footage from while I was building it. So I'll be doing kind of a brief overview of the moldering process, talk about the resources that I found that really helped me, look at the location where I want to build it and how that influences what type of system I got, how I did the site preparation, got my materials, what tools I used, and then how I built the crib, the flooring, and the structure that sits on top of them, and then go over the finishing touches to get everything installed. And then finally, I'll kind of go over my conclusions. So the textbook definition of moldering is to slowly decay, generally at temperatures below that of the human body. And in this case, that's a temperature range between 40 and 99 degrees F. This becomes important when you're looking at the type of system you're going to select for your location and the ambient temperatures that you get there. The idea behind this process is to compost human waste in a slow, consistent manner that minimizes labor and odor while protecting local water quality and environmental health. One of the key elements of this is to ensure that the liquids and solids are separated to keep the system aerobic and to keep the odors down. These are the resources that I used in selecting and building this. The first is the Backcountry Sanitation Manual, which you can see highlighted there in red. This has really great information on all sorts of off-grid or backcountry type sanitation options. And then the specific plans I used are produced by the U.S. Forest Service, and I've included the attachment and address there at the bottom. So here you can just see the front cover of the sanitation manual, and you can see the type of plans that I'm working with. I'll bring these plans back in as we're kind of going over building of the different parts of the system. So my location is in the shrub steppe of the Columbia Plateau. Altitude is probably 15 to 1,700 feet. It gets 25 inches of rain a year, so it's fairly dry. Average temperature ranges are from 32 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And then my expected period of use is primarily March through November. So as far as where I wanted it as close to my off-grid camping and cabin as possible, but also having enough buffer in case of odor. I didn't want it upwind or downwind of the site, so I staggered it off to the side. I also wanted to consider the prevailing winds and also the potential for wildland fires in how I constructed it and where I constructed it. Finally, from an landscape architecture standpoint, I just wanted it to kind of blend into the landscape as much as possible. So here's the site I've chosen. I've excavated out about maybe 1.5 to 2 feet on the uphill side slope. I've got it leveled out. You can see back there is where it ties into a trail. You see over there how close we are to the containers. Predominant airflow is either straight that way or sometimes it comes back this way. But the idea being you're a little offset for the winds. So here you can see where I'm kind of working on the gravel base for my site. So the first thing I did was I dug out a roughly 9 foot by 9 foot platform. Now remember, the footprint of the structure for me is going to be 8 feet by 8 feet. I wanted that extra foot so that I had a place to put in a French drain around the portion of the foundation that recesses into the hillside. I put it down about 3 inches of gravel, and then I kind of compacted by hand until it was level. And then I used kind of silt fencing, drain cloth, and perforated pipe for the drainage to go around the base of it, exiting on either side of the structure. So in terms of materials and tools, with the plans they had the link to earlier, on the plans are actually a materials list for almost everything you need. I did do some adaptation of this in terms of some of my materials selection and also in terms of the design of the structure. In terms of what tools you need, I use basic carpentry tools: hand saws, drills, drivers, sawhorses, etc. Miter saw is probably the most complex tool that I used. For the site preparation, I need a wheelbarrow, pick, shovel, rake, a compactor, a 12-foot ladder, and things like metal shears. So as far as where I got my materials, you can always do the big box store, but I've kind of found if you look for them, you can find these small local lumber mills that typically have much better quality wood. And the prices typically are almost the same, if not sometimes even cheaper than what you get the big box. You do have to do more preparation work. Here you can see where there's the split ends that you need to cut off. And then I needed to do all of my own treatment of the wood that was going to be in ground contact. And here I used copper coat and a layer of lacquer to prepare that wood. So here we are starting with the true 4x4s, 4 inches by 4 inches, not 3 and change by 3 and change. And then I did the wood preservative, copper green brown wood preservative. You know, it's pretty dry here. You can see here's what the wood looked like kind of before. It's pretty dry here, and I'm not as worried about rot. My big concern are like carpenter ants. I know look at the wood pile over there. I've seen a few and kind of put out bait for them for varying levels of effect. So as far as the construction of the crib, I started with the 4x4s to create the ground level. And here I used the handsaw and chisel to kind of cut out, shape, and smooth the points where they attach together. I worked on matching pairs so that they would all have the same dimensions, and then I would just kind of test assemble it and fit it as I went to make sure that everything fit when it was time to install it. Here's the plans for the crib construction from the Forest Service. I did make some changes here. I upsized to 8 foot just to simplify the construction in terms of how much cutting I had to do. Although I did find out later this will affect your eave overhang on the roof later. So I preferred to go without the eave overhang just because of the high winds in my location. I wanted a bit of a tighter, stronger structure. Here we go, level. I probably will build up that stone in the front a little bit. Kind of see there, it's a little soft, but I brought the truck down. I got a little bit of gravel left, and I want to save it for the back when I'm going to run the drainage on the 2 sides there. So I'll bring another load up from town. I'm starting the first course there, first 8-footer, another 8-footer there, and then get some in the back. We'll start putting this thing together. So once I had the first frame down, I did fill in another 1 to 2 inches of gravel into each of what I'll call the chambers. And this just helps hold the base frame in place while you're working with it. I was kind of constantly having to push additional gravel underneath it to ensure that I maintain level as I went up. And then the whole thing I just screwed together with 6-inch screws. Another way that you can do this is you can drill holes through it and then just use rebar to attach all of the wood members to each other. Okay, before I start putting this thing together and screwing it together, I'll show you the hardware I'm going to use. For the exposed areas, I'm going to use these kind of structural landscaping screws. These ones I got on Amazon, and they're a pretty good deal. I forget the exact amount, but they were like almost half of what the Home Depot ones were. And I think they're actually better than the Home Depot ones. The inverse is true. I kind of bought these 6-inch screws on Amazon, and I don't know, they're very kind of marginal quality. Like, they're not straight. You can see the finish on them isn't uniform. So I probably use these kind of structural screws from Home Depot. These things are like, I don't know, maybe a third thicker. So I'll start with these on the bottom, and I'll probably use those up top. So here we go, putting everything together. Before I go up too high, I'm going to put in some drain pipe just kind of along this section where it kind of goes into the hillside. So it'll kind of go here and down here. I'll run it there with like an exit going out. It's not for waste at all. It's just for rainwater and just to kind of keep this foundation dry. Okay, so go ahead and follow the plans and you build up your crib. This is what the crib looks like before I add the flooring system. Constantly be checking your level, and I would just have a little pry bar and I'd kind of throw some extra gravel in and kind of compact the whole thing down. Don't forget to apply a copper coat to your cut ends of your wood, and then you can, once this is done, you can go ahead and install your dividers in between the two chambers, and I go ahead and just lacquer everything just to help kind of preserve the wood. See here, I've got the hardware cloth in, heavy duty staples. I also use a lot of little staples just to help stabilize it, and then I do come in with heavier staples. Over here I've added, this is kind of this aluminum buck netting. I think it'll last a lot longer than the rubberized or plastic version, but you can see here, I'll cut out that central hole when I make the door for it. And the joist will sit right where that 4x4 is. And so I'll probably have to do a little something to kind of tack that to the joists that go across there. But just getting all the little nooks and crannies. So now I'll work on this side and we'll get this finished. Okay, so I got the screens in. Now it's time to start working on the flooring system and the puppy. Okay, so here's the plans for the flooring system. A couple things to note here is you really want to make sure that your joist spacing fits the toilet system that you're going to install. Here are the plans. It shows for 17 inches of diameter, and I was using the same toilet riser, which is also 17 inches. But you really want to make sure you're not having to cut into your joists when you're going to install your toilet. Also, this plans show two top hatches on the right-hand figure. I did not install those. I just figured I had enough access with the hatches down below in order to be able to kind of move material around. As far as the flooring system, I treated all of the wood. I ran out of the brown copper coat, and so I used green copper coat. In this case, actually makes it easier to kind of see one piece from another. In this case, to maintain level, I did go ahead and shim this just a little bit. And then I put everything together using angle brackets and Simpson hardware with the L brackets. And in this, I used all the Simpson strong tie screws. And then I did go ahead and make a change here. I had the extra wood, so I went and added an extra 4x4 cross member there. I figured it'll just make the floor much more solid. It also would have gotten in the way of the hatches that we kind of mentioned before. And then I also installed the blocking around the access hatches that you can see there in green. Okay. Nice part is I've got this lip here that I can set the joists on running across. So I don't think I'm going to use the hangers, although I think I will use some L brackets to stabilize them. So the product I used for the toilet was this Romtech toilet riser. This is the same thing the Forest Service uses in a lot of their toilet vaults. It was like 300-ish and change. Very good quality. Like you sit on it and it's very robust. The base dimensions on it are 21 by 17 inches, and it protrudes down to the floor. You can see that lip in the lower right-hand corner. That's what sits on the floor above and supports the toilet. You really need to make sure you set your joists to accommodate this. So here I went ahead and installed my joists, and since I was able to kind of set them on the structure, I did not use hangers and just kind of tacked them in place. But then also I did put in a series of L brackets at various points just to kind of stabilize the whole thing. For me, I had to have a minimum of 17 inches of spacing over the center chambers. And some people I've seen actually box out around where the toilet's going if you just want the extra stability. And then again, don't forget to treat the cut ends of your treated wood so you're not leaving any untreated layers exposed. So I went ahead and started working on the shed. These are the plans, very kind of simple shed roof. Some people have asked, why is this so big? U.S. Forest Service plans, these are ADA compatible. So I also kind of thought, given the weather and the environment, it would be good to have a structure that was a little bit larger at my location just to store materials in, and then just if people need to change or something like that, they've got the space. Ideally, you orientate the door towards the uphill side so that it makes it a lot easier to get in and out. I chose not to do this just because, again, the prevailing winds on my site. I wanted the door facing away, and I also wanted the slope of the roof to be such that the wind moves up and over the structure. Here also I made some changes. I used 3/4 inch tongue and groove plywood for the floor instead of the 2x4 lumber flooring showed in these plans. And then I installed my own flooring on top of that. I also put a window in the back wall, and that required that I put a header in for that. And you'll see that in the framing pictures. So I went ahead and started by framing the front and the back of the structure. And I did this on my deck so that I made sure I had a nice level, flat surface, and then carried these over and installed them by bracing, by attaching a 2x4 with one screw that could hinge, getting them up on the structure with some blocks, and then just tacking, and once level, just tacking the diagonal to hold the frame in place. Here you can see it with the frames installed. You can see how I had the diagonals in place, and you can see those blocks there just to help the placement of the walls. These things are heavy, which meant I just had to kind of slide it up against that. And here you can see the headers that I installed for the door and the window. So once I have the front and back up, then I just basically frame on either side in to stabilize the whole thing. I also had some extra wood, so I applied some extra blocking here and there just to help the lateral stability of the whole structure. And then once the frame was up, I added 1/2 inch sheathing on 3 sides, and then I had a bunch of reclaimed 3/4 inch OSB that I used around the front door. With the Forest Service plans, they don't show any sheathing; they just add siding. I like the sheathing because it just adds a lot more structural integrity to the building. This thing's rock solid. In the biggest gusts I've been in there, it doesn't move at all. So then, now that I've got the walls up, I'm ready for my rafters. So here I'm using 2x6s. And what I did was I cut the first one, figured out all the angles, got it fit up there, and then used it as a template to make all the others. And for this, you'll kind of need a carpenter square and a jigsaw. So here I installed the rafters and tied them down with hurricane straps. And then I also, you can kind of see here, I went a little overboard, but I put in additional blocking all over the place just to stiffen up the whole roof structure and also kind of give more wood to help tie the roof down. Once I had that, once I had the rafters in place, I put in 1/2 inch plywood sheathing for the roofing material, and then I wrapped it in underlayment. Here's kind of a trick I did, especially with the wind, is I used a 2x4 and wrapped it around a 2x4, started nailing at the bottom, and then just would unroll it as I went. That way it kind of kept the underlayment under control while I was installing it. So with that on, I added the drip edge and started installing the metal roofing. Here I use 2-inch self-sealing roofing screws using the existing holes. If there was any cracking in the reclaimed roofing, I just go ahead and silicone on both sides to seal it up. And I did make a mistake here with the drip edges. I should have installed the exterior trim, then put in the drip edges. Similarly, I should have also cut the roofing a bit longer so that I had at least 1 inch to 2 inches of overhang on both the top and the bottom. But I guess we all kind of learn from our mistakes. So with the structure itself, I went ahead and I had the extra material, so I went ahead and added underlayment wrap around the whole building. I just figured this thing's in the elements, it's in a lot of wind, so not only would it help keep the wind out, but it would just help kind of protect the wood over the life of the structure. Notice here how I used a telescoping painter's pole in order to be able to do this by myself, where you can have it holding it in place while you're tacking it down, and then you just kind of keep going around unrolling it as you tack it down. And then as you go up the structure, you'll just overlap the undersheathing. So I went ahead and cut out the windows, added all the flashing tape. I did kind of put in a jamb at the bottom there that angled outward and left a 1/4 of an inch gap there, just so if any water gets in, it'll kind of flow out of the building. And then I went ahead and taped everything up and installed the sub trim there over my rafter tails. So with that part done, I started working on the trim. So I went ahead and I measured up the trim with the angles, cut it, went and fit it, and then before I installed it, I did a lot of the staining where I could down on the ground. It just makes it a lot easier and you do a better job. You don't get trips everywhere. On the right, you can see here we're preparing the trim boards for the top part of the structure. Okay, so as far as the siding and the trim, I put the trim in on the corners, and that kind of served as my reference point for all of my other siding. Then I installed these J channels, which it's just like it sounds. A J channel, you can slide your siding. It's about 3/4 inch gap. You can slide your siding in that, makes for a very clean look. It also allows a place where the water can kind of go in and then go down without touching the structure. I did silicone between the trim and that J channel. Then I installed this Z channel, which the top of the metal siding will go into that, and then the wood siding I'm going to use for the top reveal sits on top of the Z part of the channel. And then here's the process where I realized my mistake with the drip edge, where it's like, oh shoot, that should be on the outside of the trim, not the inside of the trim. I ended up just using roof caps to cover the whole thing so that you won't be having water working its way down in between the trim and the sheathing. So I went ahead and installed the reclaimed siding. This I just took off a local house that was being demolished. And I like the patina. I like how the weathered look kind of fits in well. I just used the existing holes for the most part with the roofing screws. Also, you can see there where it very cleanly kind of slides into that J channel on either side and around the window. It makes for a very kind of clean look. And then I added prodigious amounts of silicone kind of where it looked like water could maybe get behind it. So I've seen kind of different people have different opinions on that, whether or not to do that. Then once I've got the main siding up, I went ahead and added the rest of the trim on the upper part of the structure. Here I didn't have to be as neat on my top line because I knew there was a cap coming over the whole thing, so it would kind of hide it. I'm not sure if I need battens over the gaps between the trim boards. There is that underlayment there. I'm just going to kind of watch it and see. If I do, I probably will use a thinner stock material than this inch ponderosa pine that I'm using for everything else. So with that done, I worked on the door and also the hatch covers. And here I used the same inch ponderosa pine I used for everything else, including floorings, trim. And I just kind of did a barn style door. We'll see how well these work. But they seem pretty solid and they look pretty good. So here I just use smaller, I think 1 5/8 screws to tack everything together, and then kind of wood glue and clamps where possible. Okay, the exterior is officially done. So okay, so for finishing touches, I needed to add stairs and a handrail. So I simply just got a 5-step riser off of Amazon. I think it was like $50. These work really good. I've got them on my other decks, although you do need to adapt the hardware a little bit to get the treads to stay on in a firm manner. The stairwell, handrail, I didn't want to have to add a full banister and kind of dig something in. I found this, and this actually works really good. It's just you reach up, you can grab it. It's there when you need it. So the stair treads is just standard pressure treated wood. You know, even with this stuff, it's usually like the lowest quality wood they use. So even though it's pressure treated, I do go ahead and put like a couple layers of stain on it just to help protect it. And then it does make it a little slippery, so I'll probably put either like some sort of adhesive, or maybe I'll just put some wood screws into the top of it just to provide traction. The pine on the right, the flooring on the right is milled ponderosa pine. It's 1 inch, the same stuff I use for all the trim. And here I'm rough fitting the boards, and then I would have to kind of go in and then use a crowbar to kind of bend the boards straight where possible, and then I'd have to fill in the cracks. This took a lot of sanding, a lot of hand planing, but I think it came out looking pretty good. So this is one of the kind of big moments, was cutting out the ports for the toilet riser. Note the joists. There you can see I have very little tolerance. You know, I think I cut a 6.5 inch wide port in a 7 inch space, so it gives me a 1/4 inch on either side. To do this, what I did was I just measured a center point between the joists from below, did a drill hole, and then used that as my reference. And then I took the toilet riser and then just traced out on the ground where it was, using that center hole, and it worked out really well. Here you can see where I've test fitted the toilet riser on the right, and you can see the hole we were looking at before on the left. You want to save these cutouts and add cross bracing on them so that you can kind of plug the other hole when not in use. So, conclusions. You can see here the plug on the right in the ground. You can see the toilet riser installed on the left. It looks pretty good. It's super solid. Like, really can't talk about this toilet enough. So the idea is after 1 year, you'll move the toilet riser from the left to the right. You'll let the left chamber fallow for a year while you use the one on the right. And then when it's time, you scrape everything out. And by that point, you should have usable compost. I'm kind of interested to see how much manipulation I need to do. If I need to kind of, supposedly you get like a poop cone, and if you need to flatten that out. Also, I think here it's so dry, I might actually need to add moisture as necessary to keep the biological activity going. Here in the middle in the trash can, that's where I keep my pine shavings. And then also I have a little trash can for things that can't compost in the system. So we'll just end up by doing the quick walkthrough of the facility. This thing is a 2-chamber moldering privy. The principle of it is that instead of going in a pit where things go anaerobic, this goes aerobic. And so therefore, you keep the odors down. Where I live is fairly dry, so I think if anything, I might actually have to add moisture to keep the biological activity going. Anyway, the idea is you've got 2 of these chambers here. I'll just put you in, and then you'll see upstairs inside how I have the toilet set up, and you use it for like a year or so, and then when you get the cone of poop, you move it over to the other plug hole here, which you can see is already pre-cut and ready to go. So the idea is you use these pine shavings and 2 scoops for poop and 1 scoop for pee. If we haven't used it, we're going to christen it here in just a few minutes. But this is a big... Well, thank you for watching this. And if you got any questions, just go ahead and leave them in the comments, and I'll try to do the best that I can to answer them. Mountain Boy out.